Welcome to Chapter 2, Part 1. Today, we're going to be talking about epistemology again and thinking about a continuum of methods and possibilities in communication research. We're looking at both more humanistic or humanities-based epistemologies and more scientific-based epistemologies, and then talking about what is in between those things, what is in the middle, which is not clearly articulated in your book and which I'm articulating, which is going to be very much part of our class. So first of all, on one end, right, we can think of this as the left end, is the humanities based approach to research. It's very aesthetic, meaning how do things look and sound, and taste even? How are they emotional? How are they subjective, right? How does a documentary present a particular point of view, right? How does a feminist analysis or a Marxist analysis or a critical race analysis look at a particular problem or a particular text and make an argument about it from that's looking at how it's put together and the emotional appeal it's making and the way in which it gives subjective knowing. On the other end of the continuum, which we can think of as the right end of the continuum, is science, which is much more systematic, it's much more precise, it's much more about control in making knowledge. Why do we need all of these different approaches, right? Because there's no one way to understand the world. Some things are measured and should be measured. Some things really can't be measured. Some things are messier than that, right? There's a place for really subjective opinions. This is how I feel. This is how I make sense of it. There's a need for looking at things in terms of patterns, right? What is the dominant view? What people generally doing? What is this group of people and generally believe about things? And we can't do that just one way. So if we're looking, for example, at studying social media, we could send out a survey, right, to lots of people, and it's pretty broad, but it's limited on how in-depth that it can get. It's getting information that is on very specific ideas and measuring them. Contrast that to interviews, much more time intensive, meaning it just takes a long time to do them, but you get very, very rich data on usually a smaller number of people, so you go more in depth, but with fewer people. The key thing is to align your question, your research question or your research hypothesis, right, with the method that can best approach it. Some questions simply cannot be answered using some methods. Other methods are better suited for other approaches, and we will talk about that as we go through the quarter. So if we have this continuum of methods, and at one end is humanistic or humanities-based knowledge, and the other end is science, what might we think about those in terms of epistemology? Well, we can think of subjective research as being more humanistic, right? More individual view, point of view, and perspective, and science as more objective, right? As closer to being a very carefully and precisely measured idea of world that comes closer to a much more a reality that could be validated, that can be confirmed with a consensus point of view. But this leads to the question of if that's, aesthetics and and humanities on one end, and we have science on the other end, what the heck is in the middle? And by the way, it doesn't really matter whether you think of science or art as on the left or on the right. I don't care. The point is that they're at opposite ends. And therefore, what is in the middle? And what is in the middle really matters, because that's actually where most of us spend most of our time. And that's intersubjectivity, right? So if we have objective and subjective, what's in the middle is intersubjective. And that is a common understanding. That's going to vary among groups, of course. But there's my personal view, for example, about what is great TV. I happen to love a show that was on when I was a much younger adult called The West Wing. Loved it. Think it's an amazing show. Still like to go back and watch it as sort of a comfort thing, right? And that is my very personal view. Right. And then there's a very objective measure. We could try to measure how the quality of television and different streaming services and what kind of production values went into making that television. For example, Game of Thrones is generally thought to be a very well made. It's well acted. They spend a lot of money getting on location shots and incredible elaborate sets, right? So that could be not completely objective, but closer to that end, right? And then what is in the middle? Well, the intersubjective view would be what's really common, what's really popular, right? What things have a lot of people appreciated. And those are sort of the enduring TV shows that are common, that a lot of people like. Of course, that's going to change over time. So the middle is not like one fixed thing. It's just more common understandings rather than just my one unique point of view or your one unique point of view. All of research methods have different ways of thinking about it. Again, with these two ends, right? With the scientific end, with objectivity, it's a point of view that there's knowledge sort of out there or truth out there, and that we're trying to access it. So it's about discovering knowledge. On the other end, on the humanities or subjective end, it's about creating knowledge. It's about making those arguments that are very personal from where we sit or stand, right? And then, again, in the middle, which is not in the book, there's a shared or constructive knowledge, right? There's some patterns, at least among some people, of what they prefer or what they understand things as. We do have common understandings. Do we agree about what's great about Santa Clara, what's not so great about our university? Maybe not entirely, but we have some ideas in common about what these buildings are called, what the history of the place is, why it is a valuable place that we all agree to be part of, right? There's some intersubjective ideas in the middle. Likewise, inductive reasoning, right? Taking a bunch of examples or ideas and building up to a point about that is inductive reasoning, and that is at the humanities side. Deductive reasoning is trying to get more towards that objectivity. It's about saying, here's a theory or a set of measurements, right? And let's see what we get. Let's see what the outcome is. So it's reasoning from a particular set of assumptions and ideas, and then going down from there to come to a very specific logical conclusion based on the very specific process that you engaged in. However, there's again something in the middle, which is not talked about in the book. If it's possible to reason up to a point that built on a bunch of different examples or texts or ideas, which is inductive, and it's possible to reason down from a very specific set of assumptions, which is deductive. Well, what is abductive? That's the middle. That's going back and forth between reasoning from the ground up and reasoning from the theoretical top down. Right? It is possible to go back and forth between those ideas.